Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who selected Israel from all the peoples and gave them your Torah to be a light to the Gentiles. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah. Amen. As Simeon the priest declared after seeing the newborn Yeshua, "For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light of revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel." Luke chapter 2, verses 30 to 32.
Shalom Torah Club members, this is Boaz Michael once again with Toby Janicki, and we'll be discussing this week's Torah portion for Torah Club Volume 1, Unrolling the Scroll, and this week's Parsha is Vayechi. In this Parsha, we're going to discuss several components, once again reflecting upon our actions and how we relate to others around us with the primary thought of loving our neighbor as ourselves. We're working through the book of Rabbi Pliskin, and this week we're going to be discussing several things. The first thing we're going to be discussing is that Rabbi Pliskin pulls out from Genesis 47, verses 29 through 31, the idea that true kindness is when you help someone without an ulterior motive. So let me read the text, and then Toby, why don't you pick up and give us some background, and then we'll continue to discuss from there. When the time came for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in the land of their burial place." And he said, "I will do as you have said." He said, "Swear to me." So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed.
So as we were saying, that Rabbi Pliskin draws out of this the idea that, real true kindness is when you're helping someone and you don't have any kind of ulterior motives. So the idea that he gets here is that Israel, Jacob, asks Joseph to bury him in the land of Israel and not in Egypt. Therefore, he's asking a favor of him. Joseph agrees to do this favor. It's a kindness towards his father, and he does do it, but it's a kindness that never receives any kind of reward or thank you, because Jacob cannot pay this back. He'll be dead and gone by the time Joseph carries this out. So it's an example of an act of kindness that is done, and there's no benefit at all whatsoever in it for the one who performs it.
So the sages actually build on this, and part of the morning prayer service is a section from the Talmud that essentially says, these are the commandments, or these are the mitzvahs, or these are the things that you do that do not necessarily have reward in this life or benefit in this life, but the primary reward or the primary benefit is in the world to come. And they use this phrase in the construction of these mitzvot as escorting the dead.
Yeah.
That when we escort the dead, which kind of sounds strange, but it's exactly what's being said here in this text. Basically, when you take care of the deceased and making sure that they have been buried properly, according to their wishes, in honor, all of these type of things, and you're not going to get anything in return, because that person can't say thank you, that person can't praise you, that person can't say, hey, great job, because they're dead, that the reward for that, the primary reward for that, is in the world to come. How we treat others, even in death, or how we treat others when they can't do anything for us in return, the reward for us is in the world to come. So we must do acts of kindness without ever thinking about the idea of what's in it for me.
Yeah.
And this is so difficult, because that's the way our flesh has been trained. And we have to constantly be keeping our heart and our minds and our motives in check in regards to our acts of kindness. What is in it for me?
It's funny you bring that up, because what I thought of is one of my favorite movies is called Field of Dreams, where that voice, Kevin Costner's in it, and that voice tells him, asks him to build this baseball field and do all this stuff in his cornfield. And it always makes me think of this, because the end of the movie, he starts to feel like, why did I do this? What's in it for me? And so he goes on this big rant, and he says, I've done this, and this, and I've never asked, what's in it for me? And the guy says, well, what are you saying? He says, well, what's in it for me? You know, it's like, it's so difficult for us to do things, righteous acts or whatever it is, without having just that little bit of self-centeredness where we want to know that this is doing something for us. And sometimes when we do acts of kindness, it can even not be necessarily about getting a thank you, but getting that warm feeling inside that makes us feel good about ourselves. So it's very difficult to get rid of that. There's a story that Rabbi Pliskin brings out in his book again. I'm going to read it. It says, when Rabbi Moshe was 7 years old, there was a severe famine in Lithuania. Poor people wandered from village to village in search of food. Many of them flocked to the home of Rab Moshe's mother, who readily cooked and baked for them. Once a very large number of the poor came to her home, and she had to cook for them in shifts. When some individuals grew impatient and insulted her, she began to cry, since she felt that she was doing her utmost for them. Her young son, the future rabbi of Corbin, said to her, "Why should their insults trouble you? Don't their insults help you perform the mitzvah with sincerity? If they had praised you, your merit would be less, since you might be doing the kindness to gain their praise, rather than to fulfill the Almighty's command." So in this, what we learn here is, anything should be done. Even, I got to admit, my reaction would be like, you know what, this is a free lunch. You guys can take off, But instead, those insults become a lesson to learn, why are you really doing this? Are you doing it so that they'll even be courteous to you? No, I'm doing this because this is what our Father in heaven commands us to do, and it's the right thing to do.
The master, once again, just hits a home run, to go back to your Field of Dreams analogy. And he hits this home run because he identifies the issue, and he identifies the tendency of our flesh, and he asks pointed questions. And one of these questions comes in Luke chapter 6, verse 34 through 35. He says, "If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even the sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men." So again, here's the master, and he's hitting this home run by saying, if you only lend to those in which you expect to receive from, how are you different than the world? How are you different from sinners? Because they lend in order to receive back the same amount. He goes on to say, love your enemies, do good, lend, expecting nothing in return.
Yeah.
And again, the difficulty is our flesh is inherently selfish, and everything always somehow comes back to, what is the benefit in this for me?
Yeah. It's funny because scholars feel that the background to this text might be the remission of loans that takes place in the Sabbatical Year. So the cycle in Israel is divided up into a 7-year cycle, where in the 7th year, not only do you allow the land to lie fallow, you don't plow, you don't plant and water and so forth, but you also, all debts are canceled. So if you can imagine, when somebody comes around the 5th and 6th year of this cycle and says, hey, can I borrow X amount of money? Someone's liable to say, well, there's no way he's going to be able to pay that back by the 7th year, and he's going to get away with this, and I'm not going to have to, I'm going to be out $1,000 or whatever it is. And this was a real problem because people were not able to get loans as that sabbatical year was approaching. And in fact, they had to kind of develop these legal loopholes because people needed the money and so forth. But Yeshua seems to really be hitting that, saying, lending money is a mitzvah. It's not like today where a lot of people borrow money from the bank so they can buy a boat or, a new Mercedes. In that day and age, farmers needed to borrow money to make it through the year, and then they would pay it back. So Yeshua's really hitting that home, like you were saying you need to lend the money and stop thinking about yourself. Stop thinking about, what am I going to get out of this? Because the true motive should be to help out your neighbor.
And like everything, we see here really, I mean, the text doesn't really deal with it, but the flip side of that is not to take advantage of people, not to take advantage of situations. So, a person could disingenuously say, well, I'm going to borrow money in the 5th year and take advantage of this situation. For God's economy to work properly, for God's economy and the kingdom to be established, it requires it requires every one of us to function in a biblical manner. And in doing so, something beautiful can really spring forth.
Absolutely.
All right, Toby, let's take this second point that we want to draw out and talk about it for a few minutes. Rabbi Pliskin once again draws from the Torah, and he's drawing and teaching us that we are not to turn our nose at the mention of someone else's name. All right, so let's look at Genesis 49, verse 6. Let my soul not enter into their council, and let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen.
So let me read to you the explanation that Rabbi Pliskin has in his book, and then we can discuss it. So we're thinking, how does this relate to turning up your nose at the mention of someone's name? So he says, although not the literal meaning of the verse, the thought has been expressed that besides meaning in their anger, the Hebrew here can also be defined as with their nose. So we would interpret it, with their nose they slew men. Quite often, by just turning up one's nose, one can greatly harm another person. If that person is present, he will feel belittled and humiliated. Even when someone is not present, turning up one's nose at the mention of his name implies derogatory attributes and can cause someone to lose their job or marriage prospects. So what he's saying here is that turning up one's nose, we've all been involved in conversations. We've done it ourselves where we say, you remember Jim from so-and-so, we go, oh, that guy, that we haven't said anything bad, but people can tell by our voice reflection, our facial expression, that we do not like this person. And even those subtle things, if we interpret it the way that Rabbi Pliskin brings this out, instead of for in their anger they slew men, we can change it around a little bit, and it can say with their nose they slew men. Having just these facial expressions, these slight comments, is equivalent to murdering that person because you're murdering their character.
Or a slight comment, I'll add to that by saying a half a comment, where you begin a sentence and then you stop yourself.
Yeah.
And then it causes a question in a person's mind to sit back and say, well, what were they going to say?
Yeah.
So we have to be careful, because negativity, or like looking down on other people, or even gossiping, going as far as gossiping, can cause people hardship, financial loss, embarrassment, and all these type of things. The Proverbs speak of this. In Proverbs 20, verse 19, it says, he who goes about as a slanderer reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with gossip.
So we've talked a little bit in the past about Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, and gossip, and often, like we said, we think that when we think of gossip, we think of telling this tale about someone, but even facial expressions are equivalent to murder and to gossip, just these small things. And really, not only does the proverb warn us about not having this character ourselves, but we really should do our best to try to steer away from people who frequently display this type of characteristic.
The Master, as we reflect on the Gospels, as reflect upon his life, we see time and time again that he treated everyone with respect and dignity, even other people, even individuals that other people turned or lifted up their nose towards, so to speak, like tax collectors and sinners, that he treated them with dignity, with respect, and he did not speak ill of them, nor allow his gestures to cause separation or distance. In fact, they came to him.
Yeah.
This actually leads into another component which Rabbi Pliskin pulls out. In Genesis 29, verse 12, it says, his eyes are dull from wine, and his teeth are white from milk. And from this text, he essentially says that we are to smile at our fellow man.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he gets this because the Talmud takes this Hebrew, and by the way, I don't know how many people know this, but the Hebrew of that prophecy when Jacob speaks over his children is some of the most difficult Hebrew in the entire Tanakh, in the entire Hebrew Bible. It's very, very difficult to interpret. If you pick up a bunch of different translations, you'll figure that out because everybody has it worded almost entirely different. So the Talmud piles one more stone on the interpretation of this verse, and it says that you can read it like this. The Hebrew can be read to say, one who shows his teeth in a smile to his fellow man is better than giving him milk to drink. And milk was a staple in that day. It was, was something, a delicacy kind of thing. So it really, the Talmud is interpreting this verse to say a smile towards one's fellow is a valuable gift that you can offer.
The Master tells us that we are to inquire of the shalom of others, that he had this expectation that when we greet or when we meet people, that we inquire of their peace, but our countenance and our facial gestures and our body language, so to speak, a smile on our face goes a long way to nourishing the soul. Just like milk nourishes one's body, a smile, a happy countenance, and a kind greeting and the inquiring of their peace, of their shalom, brings nourishment to their soul. So again, as we work through the Torah, all of these things that we're discussing, if we apply them, if we discipline our lives to truly make these a component of who we become or who we are in the Messiah, we truly will reflect upon the Messiah in a very powerful and meaningful way. Inquire of people's peace. Be kind in our response to them in terms of a smile on our face. Do not allow our countenance to reflect negatively upon individuals. All of this is demonstration of the life and the peace and the goodness that is found in the Messiah.
And as the Apostle Simon Peter admonishes us, grow in the grace and knowledge of our Master and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. To him be the glory both now and to the day of eternity. Amen.
Amen.